Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, and it's very nice to see you in person.
Yeah, very nice to see you in person. I'm an admirer of your show, and what took you so long to invite me? No, I'm only kidding. I'm very happy to be on your show and to be in person.
Well, I'm very happy that you're my guest here today and to be meeting you in person. I know that you said that this is maybe a better idea to have it in person. It's a bit of a change, and I agree. It's a very nice setting here. So, welcome
Thank
to
you.
our Wicked show. Who cares? And today we're going to be talking about a bit of a different subject. It's not really about anything legal or like the law itself, but it's more about the practice of criminal defense. And I know you want to talk about humor in the practice of criminal defense, because criminal defense lawyers, we do have a very specific type of humor and sense of humor that not a lot of people necessarily understand.
We do. I learned this the hard way. But I did. I don't think people realize defense lawyers they really are my favorite people. Mm-hmm. I stopped. I've been practicing for about 15 years. I think at the beginning I may have seen other defense lawyers as my competition, but at some point I started seeing us as a guild of sorts.
Okay.
And there's just so many things that I can recognize when I see other defense lawyers, and we understand each other. I think better than most people, yourself included. Like when I saw you in Brampton recently for your jury trial, the stress, right? Like I can recognize it. Or how's it going, Maya? It's like I got a sex assault jury trial. I don't know how it's going to go. Like I recognize it and just, feel the love immediately for my fellow defense lawyers now.
So let's talk then about that. Let's just first talk a little bit about the stressful aspect of the practice and then get into the humor part and how you cope, because you have a few funny stories that you're going to share and that I think only criminal defense lawyers can really understand.
Yeah, let's hope only criminal defense lawyers watch this podcast because...
Well, you never know, but I mean, we'll have to say that this is really more of a criminal defense kind of environment, so it may look a little bit vulgar to people who don't practice in criminal defense, but it's a joke.
Disclaimer.
Yes.
Vulgar,
disclaimer.
But it's a joke.
So let's start a little bit and talk about the practice of criminal defense, and then we'll get into the humor side of it, Ryan. So is it glamorous as it seems to be in the movies and in the shows?
Well, I still think, for me, the signature achievement of a defense lawyer is to win a jury trial. Like personally, I think our colleagues who do appellate cases are wonderful, but me personally, I would rather win a jury trial than win on a finer legal point at the Supreme Court of Canada. And again, I think our colleagues who do that are fantastic, but for me, the signature achievement is a jury trial. Mm-hmm. And
why is that? What's the reason for that?
I just think if you can convince, look, everybody comes in hating your client, or most people.
That's true.
So if you can convince 12 members of the public, if you can humanize your client who's charged with murder or is charged with sex assault or robbery or whatever, if you can humanize your client and get 12 members of the public to vote not guilty, you have done something remarkable. And congrats, by the way, because I believe you won that jury trial in Brampton. So that to me is extraordinary. Like, I don't think people realize how hard it is. Yes. I mean, people will ask me, you have a sex assault. The complainant says he or she, usually a she, but can also be he, was sexually assaulted. How are they acquitted? And it's like, well, it's hard, but I can do it. And, like when I hear those words, not guilty from a jury, that to me is like glamorous. Like I like to tell people. The
biggest reward, right? Yeah.
I don't drink, I don't do drugs, but give me another hit of that.
Yeah.
Like that's
me
as a lawyer. So I think that can be glamorous. Like I'm always after, especially after every acquittal, but especially after a jury acquittal, I'm looking around at the people on my way home and I'm thinking, what the fuck did you today? Dude, what the fuck did you do today? Because, I want a jury trial.
Yeah, the high is really high.
Yeah.
But then the lows can be very low as well.
Yes. The lows are very low.
Yes.
So you got to learn how to enjoy the highs and survive the lows, because the lows are bad. If you lose a jury trial, especially for a case where you believed in your client's innocence, that's bad. And then it gets worse when you hear the clink of the handcuffs. I usually don't look, but I hear the clink.
Yeah.
And the client is off. So the stress is huge. And imagine like being the defense lawyer for a murder case. Like imagine being the defense lawyer for the murder cases where we know now that the accused was innocent, like a Guy Paul Morin. I don't think people realize the stress is just indescribable. Like defense lawyers, people who are not defense lawyers don't understand. I think, which is why I love defense lawyers, to get back to the point. They do understand. Like they understand the pain that I'm going through. So yes, the stress for criminal defense, particularly when you have a client who you believe is innocent.
And who's facing a lengthy custodial sentence, potentially.
Right. Well, on a sex assault, it's just an all or nothing proposition.
Yeah.
Like the life as the person knows it is going to be over if you're found guilty of a sex assault. And typically, the clients who are charged with a sex assault are, it's sort of like, I don't know how better to say this, like normal people crime.
Yeah.
It's not somebody
no criminal background,
Right.
no involvement, no prior involvement in the criminal justice system. And this is their first time. And then once they're found guilty, it's like they're stuck in the system for the rest of their lives.
I mean, you just start to think about the consequences. If the allegation involves penetration, it's typically 5 years in jail, right? Sex offender registry, a criminal record for one of the most stigmatizing offenses known to law.
Yeah.
And this can be like, my ex-wife charged me with a sex assault, I was at a party. Like a lot of my clients who are charged with the sex assault, when they come in the door, they think it's going to be easy.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, but I'm innocent. This didn't happen.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you're in for a long road and a very, very hard fight, tooth and nail.
Yeah.
So when you're in that situation in front of a jury, it's stressful. But at the same time, the jury system is the absolute best weapon we have. If they go after another right of the accused, that will be the right they try to take, our right to have a jury
trial, right?
Since Magna Carta, because on a sex assault, the jury gets common sense.
Exactly.
And like I don't think people realize how far we are from that.
I know. It's becoming more and more frustrating in the practice of, especially in jury trials, sex assault trials. It is becoming frustrating because the law is making less and less sense. And when the judge has to apply the law, it just makes it very difficult to defend these types of cases.
You said it.
Yeah.
So I don't want to stress, yes. You sort of have to detach yourself from the consequences somehow as best you can. It's in general in life, worrying doesn't help. Worrying is not going to solve the problem, right?
Right.
So you're charged with murder. The penalty is life in jail. You got a defense. We got to run the defense. You can't plead guilty.
Right.
Right? You can't plead guilty. Like, you're innocent, you have to run it. So what does the consequence really matter? And how's it going to help? But at the same time, as the defense lawyer, you detach from it as best as you can. But
it's hard, Ryan, right? I mean, I think what people who don't practice in criminal defense, what they don't realize is that it is a heavy burden to have these files and to deal with them. It comes with a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. You're worried about everything. You're worried about your client. You're worried about how the trial is going to unfold. So there's daily stress that we have to live with. And so maybe you can tell us, though, what do you do to cope with the stress?
Well, I do a number of things. We do. One thing I would recommend for everyone to do is to work out. I think you and I have talked about.
I totally agree. Yes.
I think you and I have talked about that before. Like if you just lift weights and walk, like that's what I do. I'm like a different man since I started doing that. So like you got to do that. And you can't say like I don't have time for it, because
you have to make the time. Yeah.
Well, that's actually what's going to make you more productive.
I totally
so you have
agree.
to do that. But one thing I noticed early on in my career is that criminal defense lawyers are hilarious. Mm-hmm. And there's so much attrition in criminal defense. So for the reasons you're saying, like a lot of people don't stay. It was interesting being at my vintage, someone who's been around for 15 years. I've seen so many people leave, right? Like that's why it's interesting to me when I do a murder case now. It's like, wait, hang on a second. Like I'm one of the only guys who can do this, because we have a lot of young lawyers. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of bad lawyers. There's something interesting about the criminal defense bar, I think, is like we have the best lawyers because they're always in court. They're the titans.
Yeah.
But we also, because there's low barriers to entry, we have a lot of bad lawyers too. So there's a lot of bad lawyers running around not knowing what they're doing. But for the good lawyers who persist, almost without fail, they are hilarious. And I noticed that right away. I got to my first gig in criminal defense was to work for the late Eddie Greenspan. Mm-hmm. And he was so funny. He had me, he had me in stitches. So I wanted to tell a story for your podcast.
All right, go ahead.
I've been sitting on this because I got in trouble for telling this story a few years ago. Right after it happened, I was at like a dinner party or something, and I told my female friend the story, who was not a criminal defense lawyer.
Right, that's important to mention because I think not a lot of people understand the sense of humor that criminal defense lawyers have. So tell us, Ryan.
So she gave me the look of death after she was not moved. She didn't think it was funny, but I still think it's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. So you got to understand my mentality. I had articled at a Bay Street firm, which was excellent. Like the people were great lawyers. Like I'm not speaking. I don't want to be seen as being ungrateful or speaking ill of it. Having said that, I found the people were like it was a boring and utterly humorless environment for me. Mm-hmm. So I didn't like it. So I was coming from that environment, and like every lawyer has, I'm sure, had the thought like, am I gonna be a lawyer? Like this sucks, Yeah. So like when I got my first gig in criminal defense, I was very much of that mentality. Like this is awful. I don't want to do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So the first trial we had was a sex assault. I'm laughing already. This happened 15 years ago. I still think it's hilarious. So there was a sex assault complainant who was like, they had met on a Christian dating site, which was already really funny.
Yeah.
They met on a Christian dating site and they had sex on their first date. So already it was funny to me. But the complainant was like kind of hefty. And Eddie was trying to make the point that she was prone to exaggeration. So she had said they had sex and she had massive blood and then put back on her underwear. We actually had the underwear.
Okay.
But because she was hefty, it was folded and like it kept folding out more and more until Eddie was standing in front of her, like with her underwear saying like, where's the blood? Like this is massive blood. And he's standing there with his arms wide and this like...
And there was no blood.
There was no blood. And there was this large white garment that looked like a parachute to me. And I was watching this and I don't know how I contained myself from laughing. I thought it was so funny.
And this is happening in court, right?
This is happening
on
in
the
court.
record.
This is happening in court. And sex assault trials have changed a lot since then. There's a lot of new rules. But then it was sort of like you could put things to the complainant and like that's just how it was. You don't have to clear it with the court. So then we go for lunch and Eddie's like, I can see he's thinking, and he's looking at me, and all of a sudden he says, "Okay, Ryan, I want you to go to the I want you to go to the library." I can't get it out. I'm sorry, Maya. "I want you to go to the library, and I want you to get a ruler." And I'm thinking to myself, a ruler?
Yeah.
I haven't used a ruler since grade 11 geometry. Like, what's going on, you know?
And that was when, Ryan?
That was on the lunch break.
No, but in what year?
That was 2009, my first year practicing.
Okay.
So 15 years ago
Yeah.
now. So I had no idea why, but I went to the law library thinking that they weren't going to have a ruler, but
They did?
like, they did.
Okay,
They did in
well,
fact.
good.
They did in fact have a ruler. So I get the ruler and I'm like, "Okay, here you go, Eddie." I have no idea what's going on. So the cross-examination after the lunch break starts, and it had turned out that she had said. She had said that, like, on the video statement, she's like, "Oh, well, he's really big," and you know, and it's like,
The video statement, sorry, this is the police statement.
this is the police statement, and you know, she goes like that with her hands at some point
On the
of
video,
the video
yeah.
statement. And apparently, unbeknownst to me, Eddie had asked the client, like, well, you know, like, "How big is it?" And he said, apparently, was like, "Well, I'm frankly average. Like, you know, like I think like 5 inches or something like that." So Eddie starts the cross-examination, and he freeze frames it on the part where, like, she, you know, he plays it for her and then pauses it.
The video in
the video
court. Okay.
statement. He's like, "You showed the police how big it is. Now I want you to show us."
Yeah.
And she says, I don't know. I can't do that. Like, it's just the visual. I can't. She's like, "I want you to go up to the screen and I want you to look at what you're doing with your hands and reproduce it for us." And so she says, "Oh, well, I can't really, but, you know, it looks like that." And she goes like that with her hands. And Eddie's like, "Okay, good. And that's the best we have. And that's the truth. And I want you to keep your hands just like that. And I've got a ruler here, Your Honor. And let the record show this is a 12-inch ruler. It's 1.5 inches less than this ruler. It's a 10.5-inch penis." And there was a young lawyer in the court who, like, I was biting on my tongue
Yeah.
not to burst out laughing. To this day, I don't know how I didn't burst out laughing. And I just thought this was hilarious. This was the funniest thing I have ever seen. And if that weren't funny enough, after we went for coffee after court, like, you know, we used to talk about the day and decompress after court. And getting back to the point about Eddie being hilarious, we're sitting there and all of a sudden he says, "If I had a woman testify under oath that I had a 10.5-inch penis, I would stand up, raise my hand, and say, 'Guilty, Your Honor. I'm the guy.'" And, you know, I just remember thinking, okay, you know, like, I can do this. Mm-hmm. It was sort of like I've had those thoughts in criminal defense. Unlike when I articled on Bay Street or, you know, like other things, I thought to myself, okay, you know, like I can do this. I could do this for a long time. I could do this for 50 years.
So is this what made you want to become a criminal defense lawyer even more? Is that what made you want to stay, or?
It was one of the things that made me realize that this is where I wanted to be.
Okay.
You know?
It's these types of situations.
That was one of them. It was just this realization that, like, the criminal defense lawyers who stay, they use it as a survival mechanism, getting back to the stress.
Yeah.
How do they, like, why are you know, you find almost unfailingly that the criminal defense lawyers are hilarious. It's a survival mechanism. They survived and they persisted. They can get through a murder case, you know, like, and the humor helps them get through. And I realized that after practicing for a little while, but I just remember thinking in the moment, this is like what I want to talk about, you know, like, this is what I want to do. Like, I don't want to talk about a lease termination,
Yeah.
or like a medical malpractice issue. No, I want to talk about a sex assault and, like make jokes about it. Very often there can be situations that, though they're not funny situations, you use humor to survive the stress.
Right.
And that was a very stressful trial.
Like most trials are, but going back also on the point of jury trials, there's a lot of drama. They can be more dramatic because you are addressing a jury, not a judge alone. And it gives you the opportunity to have more of a performance type of practice.
I
as
totally
well.
agree. It's a performance,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's one of the things that makes criminal defense really hard. Is like you have to always be on. You are performing.
You're not just stating the law, making your argument. It's how you make your argument.
It's much more stressful.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is that I often think of, like, because a lot of people go out, for example, Thursday night in Toronto. It's like a big night to go out.
Right.
And I'll ask my friends who are like drinking and partying on a Thursday night, how do you get through the next day? And it's like, well, you kind of mail it in on Friday. You take like 3 coffee breaks and a lunch break, and you just kind of mail it in, and like, and the day is done. It's like, you can't do. I'm like cross-examining a witness tomorrow. Like, you can't mail it in.
Yeah.
You have to know everything. One of the things this is what I always say. If I were to say anything about the stress of criminal defense and why not to do it, I would say this is what I always tell students. It is, if you lose a case, it is absolutely no solace to say you did your best. If your client has his reputation destroyed and goes to jail, you better be able to say you did everything right. If you lose after you do everything right, that's fine. You can live with that. But if you fuck it up, like if you made a bad decision, that's not okay. And that's what makes it stressful. Mm-hmm. You better make sure you've read everything and you know everything and you've done everything right.
Yeah.
That's one of the huge stresses, because I don't think other jobs are like that. I think other jobs, it's like, well, I did my best. And it's like, well, it's okay. It's like, no, criminal defense is not like that. You better make sure you did everything right in this case and you made all the right tactical decisions. And if you didn't, you will live with it. And, like, even the losses are, once you do everything right, the losses, while they're hard, I think they're okay. It's like, well, I wouldn't change anything. Actually, one of the best moments in my career, I had a case where my client was charged with trafficking 15 kilograms of cocaine. He was the driver. It was he and his brother. His brother was the trafficker, and he was the driver. Like 15 kilograms of cocaine is like a double-digit penitentiary sentence, right? Like, I totally believed in my client's innocence. I told my wife that I was gonna quit criminal law if I lost this case, because I just felt like I couldn't live with it. But I remember before the jury went out, I looked at my client and I said, like, our eyes locked, and I said, I did everything I could. And he looked at me and he said, I know. And that was like a really powerful moment for me. I still remember it, because that's what it's about as a defense lawyer. You can't guarantee victory.
Yeah.
But you've got to be able to look at your client and say, I did everything I could. And if you can do that, and especially if your client understands it, because some of them don't, and that's a whole other story about, like, it's another category of stress. It's like the unpleasantness we deal with as defense lawyers. This guy has no idea what I did for him. He's totally ungrateful.
Yeah.
But if you can do that, then it's okay. And like, I think I tell young people that, like, students, flat out, that's what makes it stressful. It's not enough to say you did your best. So that would be the reason not to do it.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that kind of, like, work ethic to do everything you can, and it's not, I mean, to me, that's not okay. That's not the way you should practice. And there's probably a lot of bad lawyers who do practice that way, but I couldn't live with it. And
so you told us about the story. Well, first of all, what happened in that trial? That
He was found not guilty.
Okay.
So it was back in a different, it was a stressful trial. But actually, I have another story from that trial, which I often tell. It's not a humor story, but it was like another extraordinary moment for me, because he was, I can't remember what he did, but he was a professional who often did seminars. He did seminars all over the country. Like, I can't remember what he was teaching.
Christian related? Because
It was related to his profession, nothing related to his religion. But he was successful. He did seminars, and every time he had to do a seminar, he had to get a bail variation. So he had to sign a form. General public doesn't know how annoying these bail variations are. It's horrible, teeing everything up. It's time consuming. It's stressful. Like, I tell my clients, like, look, you want a bail variation, you got to pay me, because this is so annoying.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
You think it's easy. He had something like, he had been on bail for 3 years. He had something like 30 bail variations. So
that's a lot.
That is a lot
for one client.
Yeah, because every month he was traveling somewhere and he had to get a bail variation. So you have the right to. I think he had a condition not to remain in Ontario, so he had to get a bail variation every time he left Ontario, which was frequently. It was like once a month. He went to British Columbia. I think he went to the maybe.
And they have to account for the specific place that he's going to in
That's
every
right.
variation.
He had to provide
so
his.
he can't have a blanket exception.
He had to provide his itinerary every time he left.
And just, to provide some context, that's before the trial. Like, he's still presumed innocent at that point.
Yes, he's presumed innocent. But so the judge comes in. It was a judge alone trial. She says, for the following reasons, I find the accused not guilty. And I look over at him, and he starts crying. He's been on bail for so long. I was right next to him. Eddie was actually in front of me, and I was sitting with the accused, so I had the best view of him. And then the judge reads her judgment, and I'll just call him Mr. Smith. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say his name. But after she reads her judgment, she takes off her glasses, and she looks at him and she says, Mr. Smith, I find you not guilty of sexual assault. I find you not guilty of forcible confinement, and you are free to go. Court is dismissed. And she gets up and she leaves. And he looks at me. I'm going to cry. This moment always gets me. I'm going to try to compose myself. But he looks at me. People who haven't been under the system, don't understand what it's like. They can't picture it. Because he had been on bail for so long and he had signed so many forms, he looks at me and he says, where do I go to sign out now that I've been acquitted? I'm sorry, it always gets me, that story. And I look at him and I say, no, it's over. You're free. And I always... I'm very grateful, because I think to myself, I got to tell him, I got to tell him that he was free. And I remember the look on his face, and that, when I think back to law school, and that I ever considered at doing anything other than criminal defense, I got to tell him, that moment to me is worth, you can't put a price on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that trial had the stress, the humor, the high of the acquittal, they'd had everything.
And that's the thing about the practice of criminal defense, is that the highs are really high, the lows are very low. And I think criminal defense lawyers like this type of adrenaline rush that we get from winning a trial, especially if it's a difficult case. And, when you win, you feel really happy, and it's really something that you can't really compare to anything else, right?
Nothing else.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
It's it's really hard to describe when you win a trial, like how, because you're giving someone their life back.
Right. Right. Like they walk out.
Yeah.
Like Mr. Smith, he
Yeah.
walked out
Yeah.
a free man.
Yeah.
You know, I've given that to I don't know, hundreds of people, I think, at this
Yeah.
point. Like,
Yeah.
you know, so yeah, it's really like like I said before, like I'm always looking around at the normal people. I'm like, so what the fuck did you do today? You know, it's a great, it's a great feeling. It's a huge adrenaline rush. You know, I wouldn't trade it. You got to go through a lot of bad things and negative things to.
And there are losses, right? Like even when you're a good lawyer, you're still gonna lose
Of course.
cases. And this is a bit more difficult to deal with. Because just as high the win is, the loss is really crushing. For some lawyers, sometimes it's so crushing that they just don't want to practice anymore.
That's right. And that's legitimate, right? Like you.
But what do you do, Ryan, when it's this type of situation?
I think like I said, if I can say I did everything right, then I can, you know, like I can survive it. I've sort of learned how to survive it. I lost my first jury trial, unlike you.
Okay.
And I was devastated. That one really bothered me because, like, I thought I pulled it off. You know, like I pulled it off.
Yeah.
I was doing a cutthroat with another lawyer, which never works. Don't cutthroat.
Yeah.
Like there was like a bag of drugs and a gun in the car. Like you cutthroat, and then I had another epiphanal moment in that trial because my mentality was like, well, I cutthroated better than him. I won.
Yeah.
Jury comes back an hour and a half later and angrily convicts both of our clients on all counts. They had never seen anything like it. I was shocked because like I thought I had pulled it off. I thought I did a great job. And the police officer, the Crown did a great job too. I will say that. The Crown was excellent in that trial. I see her every once in a while and I'm like a great admirer of hers. So she did a great job too, which probably had a lot to do with why there was the loss. But the police officer who was sitting with her comes up to me after and says, "We love cutthroats here. We get 3 prosecutors." And I thought to myself, like, oh yeah, of course. Like you got the prosecutors prosecuting both. You got the defense lawyers prosecuting the other guy, and the defense lawyers prosecuting the other guy. You get 3 prosecutors. That's a terrible case for the defense. That's so unlikely to work. So that was a good realization too, because I had just thought like, well, I don't know, I cutthroated better than you. I should win, you know. But no, that one didn't work out, and that was tough. I've won a lot of jury trials, but in August I lost a jury trial. But I know that I did a great job and did everything right, and it was a tough case. So you know that I can live with. When you have that feeling, I think it's okay, right? Like the tough part is when I did something wrong, and that's when a loss is going to be really difficult. And you know, I don't know. That's the best I can say. Is like if I did everything right, and I know that. And I know I did a great job. Like some cases are tough. Some people are guilty.
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, some cases, the accused is actually guilty. So there's only so much you as a defense lawyer can do. We're not magicians, right? At the end of the day.
We don't create facts, as I like to say.
Exactly. We're stuck with the facts that we have, and we try to use them to our client's advantage to the best of our ability. But at the end of the day, if there is no defense, there is no defense, right?
Yeah, well, I had a defense because I was running it, but I ran it well. Like, and the jury was out a while. So, like, I remember in a tough case, the jury was out a while. I mean, you never know what the jury is talking about. Maybe they're thinking to themselves, like, well, we want to wait for our dinner before. I don't know. I think the jury was out for almost 2 days in like a tough case, and so. Even though I lost, like I'm proud of that one because it doesn't bother me as much. It's hard to lose, but I guess I'm at the point where It's like, well, I know I did a good job. It would only be, I think it would be if I thought I did something wrong. Like I remember I had a case where I thought I did something wrong, and I didn't sleep for like 3 weeks. Like it really bothered me. So that was like, that's what's tough. It goes back to what I said before. But so if you're a defense lawyer and you're losing and you didn't do a good job, like that's not good. You know, like maybe you should quit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, especially if it's something that happens all the time, right? So
yeah, but you know, sometimes you get a tough case. You do the best with the cards you're dealt, and it's interesting. Like a lot of the cases that we read in law school, it's like some defense lawyer who's taken a terrible case, but just argued a legal point.
Yeah.
Like really well, that went up all the way to the Supreme Court. Like it's defense lawyers are interesting that way.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, that terrible facts, but interesting legal point, and you actually won in the end.
But then going back a bit on the humor point, because I mean, defense lawyers are funny, and we can see that especially in, you know, parties, Christmas parties or dinners when you're with other people who are not criminal defense lawyers. It's always the defense lawyer who has the funniest story to tell, right?
Totally.
I mean, I don't want to hear about a family law dispute or, you know, a civil litigation. You know, it just feels like criminal defense lawyers are the only ones who have really funny stories.
We are the life of the party.
Yeah.
It's kind of, but this is why I love defense lawyers. It's kind of ruined my conversations with other people. Like I'll be at, like I will typically, a rule from Greenspan was to work on Sundays, and I still do, right? Like it's kind of like a habit. I work on Sundays. And I remember being at a like a brunch. I'm like meeting with a client later. I think it was a sex assault. And somebody starts talking about like something boring. I can't remember, like buying an investment property or something. Like, I don't know. I don't want to be there.
Yeah.
Like I'd rather be talking to my client than my friends have to. Okay, we're going to talk about a sex assault. Let's talk about that. You know, it's interesting. Or like a murder. It's you know, it's not boring.
Yeah.
You can say things about like criminal defense that aren't good, but you can't say it's boring.
No, not at all. And actually, one thing that I did realize is, you know, before I became a lawyer, I thought I used to watch movies where the script or the story is so wild, and I used to tell myself, well, it's just a movie, right? Like in real life, things can't get that crazy. It's just an exaggeration. But now that I'm practicing in criminal defense, some things, some situations that our clients get into, honestly, it's even crazier than a movie. Now I do believe when I see something crazy happening in a movie, I'm like, yeah, that can totally happen, because people can sometimes get into really messy situations.
Sometimes it's stranger than
I
fiction.
know.
It's like,
it's true.
What? Okay, yeah. Sometimes it's stranger than the movie. It's like, oh man, how am I going to explain this one to a jury? Yeah. So, but it's not boring. Like I learned one thing that I feel like gives me longevity. I think people have a bad habit of overvaluing good things about other people's jobs and undervaluing the good things about their jobs.
So let's do that. What's the good thing here so that people can know and start to value the good things about our job?
Okay, first of all, it's not boring.
Right.
Okay? It's always
I
interesting.
think we've established that. Like, that's clear.
Like the things we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's interest. It's always interesting.
Right.
The humor, right? Like, so, you know, my colleagues who are all brilliant, or many of them brilliant and hilarious, like I really enjoy the interaction. Remember, like I had a bail hearing in Guelph, and a lawyer comes up to me, Will Jackson, he's like a friend of mine, and like, you know, I'm stressed for the bail hearing. And he just starts nodding. He's just like, oh yeah. Yeah, like he can recognize the pain on my face, you know, and we just started nodding. We had like a moment in Guelph, like, which is kind of a rundown, or not rundown, it's kind of like a dinky courthouse. Like the pain, he recognized it, you know, so we had a moment. The other huge thing is when you practice on your own is the freedom, right? Like,
That's
which...
true.
So for me, that was always huge, because I worked only for a year and a half for Eddie Greenspan, and then I was always out on my own. So like that to me is huge. So there are negatives, so a number of our colleagues have switched recently to the Crown, quite a few.
Yeah.
And I understand, the pension, the benefits, the vacations, like all the things that we don't have, not having to deal with clients. Like, I'll talk to them, and that's what they're thinking. They're thinking about the benefits of being a Crown, which I don't have. But the way that I prefer to think about it is the benefits that I do have.
Right.
The freedom, the fact that my income is not limited, the humor, like the interaction with my defense lawyer colleagues.
You don't have policies that you have to follow.
Good point.
Yeah.
I'm my own boss, I have my own policies.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of great things about being a defense lawyer, and it's just like you can't,
and criminal defense in particular, right? Like the focus here is more on criminal defense.
Criminal defense, like that to me is, I would not switch to the Crown. It's not something that I'm thinking about at all, and I've been surprised about the people who are going. But
right, I mean, it is true, because there are some people that I never thought would switch and go to the other side, but we're seeing more and more of who we thought were hardcore defense lawyers becoming Crowns.
Yes, what is going on?
I have no idea. It's like maybe they should watch this episode and be reminded of all the fun and interesting things that only defense lawyers experience in the practice.
Yeah, that's right. Like there are negatives, but I try to appreciate the positives, like the humor, and Eddie Greenspan was hilarious. Marie Hennon, she told a joke before I was at, I can't remember what it was. I think it was at something honoring Eddie Greenspan, but I can't remember exactly. Mm-hmm. But it was before she had represented Gian Ghomeshi. She had told a joke that she said, "We as criminal lawyers, we represent people who are charged with violent acts of cruelty, acts of depravity, or as Gian Ghomeshi likes to call it, foreplay." And I was sitting in the audience, I'm in stitches, and she had other jokes, and she was so funny.
Yeah.
She was so funny at that dinner. I don't think criminal defense lawyers don't understand their strength. They tend to undervalue themselves, I find. Defense lawyers are working miracles for their clients half the time. They don't even know it. So, yeah, I just think the defense lawyers, the ones who have stayed and succeeded and practiced a long time, they're unfailingly hilarious, usually extraordinary people.
And I'm going to add here, I think their personalities are different. They're tougher, because I think we have to go through a lot more stress than, let's say, the Crowns. I'm not saying that the Crowns don't have stress, but when you have to deal with a client, everybody's against you. Judges usually, sadly, sometimes by default, they're not a fan of your clients, so it forces you to become tougher and to develop more character and have thick skin. And I find the personality of a criminal defense lawyer is also very different from that of a Crown, and you can show more personality as a defense lawyer as opposed to a Crown.
I mean, I think personality and developing your own style is a huge component of it.
Of being a defense lawyer.
What I always like to say, I tell my associate, because he's seen me do a number of jury trials, you've got to develop your own style. Mm-hmm. What works for me may not work for you. Some people use humor in a jury trial. I don't personally, but I've seen that done very effectively. You're funny, use it. The style I more prefer in a jury trial is brooding intensity building up to this huge responsibility that the jurors have. That's how I prefer to like conceive of a jury trial. But it's, in life, I always like to, there's a book by Peter Thiel, who's one of my intellectual inspirations, who he defined, I can't remember the book, I think it's his book 0 to 1, but he talks about technology. Like if you think of technology as like highly technical, a lot of people aren't going to be interested in it because they don't see it themselves as technical people.
Right.
Well, I'm not interested in machines or building machines, the sort of engineering component of it. But what he says is you can really only do two things in life. You can copy what's worked, or you can try something new. And technology understood that way, that you try something new, anyone can do that. So as a defense lawyer, you can't copy, like what I would tell people, you can't copy what he does successfully. You're better off developing your own style and trying something new, because it's going to draw on your unique skills.
And there's already that person in the field, right? Like the field needs someone else, someone new to add to it, not another one of the same
That's
lawyer.
your best chance.
Yeah.
He used humor for his jury trial. It's not going to work for you because you're not as funny.
Yeah.
She used charm for her jury trial. It's not going to work for you because you're not as charming.
Yeah.
But maybe you are, you are the kind of person who can persuade a jury because of your ability to draw on the drama of the situation. Or, because of your kindness. There can be all kinds of reasons. Or in other cases, maybe, you can do a good cross-examination by aggression. Some cases do call for aggression when you think you're dealing with someone
And
who's
some
lying.
lawyers are very aggressive in their style in court.
Some. I'm not sure it's effective in every case, but it can be. It can be in some cases, right? Like if you're dealing with someone that you believe is lying, like you got to go after them.
And I think that's what we see in movies, right? A lot of times in the movies, when there's a cross-examination scene, the lawyer is aggressive and is yelling, and we don't really see that in real life.
No, yelling isn't going to help. But being tough on a witness could help.
That's changing though now.
In what way?
In sex assault cases, especially, I find it's becoming a little bit different.
In a sex assault trial these days,
like aggression, everything is different now.
Aggression is not gonna work for you.
No.
It's gonna be like really tough. But anyway, if it ever worked, I mean, I don't think that a sex assault complainant is the type of situation that calls for aggression or really ever called for aggression. It was always a more delicate situation, I think. Although that cross-examination that Eddie did in that trial was somewhat...
He seemed to be a bit more aggressive.
That was a bit hard.
Wasn't nice.
That was a tough day for her. So.
Well, embarrassing as well, right?
It is, but embarrassment in a sex assault trial is really unavoidable.
Right.
Nobody wants to talk about this
stuff. And depends on
stuff.
because I mean, just to clarify, not all sex assault cases are that deep. Like it could sometimes just be touching. Like there's no...
Sure, but those ones aren't going to go to a jury trial.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
They're going to proceed summarily if it's a low-end sex assault.
Yeah.
So the jury trials are going to be the more serious sex assaults.
But just to clarify, that trial that you were telling us about, the Eddie Greenspan trial, that was a judge alone trial.
That
right?
was judge alone.
Okay.
That was judge alone.
I mean, it would have been interesting to see if the jury would have laughed at all these jokes, right? Like this is maybe...
I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. I learned the hard way. When I told that story to my female friend, she didn't. She was not, and I haven't told it. I've been saving it for your podcast. Now, even when I blog, I had like a blog on criminal lawyer humor. I held back the story because I got that really negative reaction. It's not funny. The sex assault trial isn't funny, but if you can laugh at it, you're more likely to survive. It's a survival mechanism. And that's why our defense lawyer colleagues are just very often like really funny, you know?
And I mean, talking about that, the colleagues, sometimes, you know, when you're having, whether it's a good day or a bad day in the practice, sometimes you only can talk to another criminal defense lawyer. I feel like you can't really tell your family about this. You can't tell friends who are not criminal defense lawyers. I don't think they get it, right?
Totally agree. They don't
It
get
has
it.
to be another fellow criminal defense lawyer.
They don't get the stress. They
No.
don't get the pain. They don't get like the annoying clients. Like
Yeah.
they don't get it. So yeah, I totally agree. But that's why, like, I really enjoy the interaction with other defense lawyers. You know, it's like I told you. That's why I don't feel like I need to see them as my competition. No, we're in this boat together.
Yeah.
You know, so when a defense lawyer has an achievement, like a good result, I really like I try to take the time to say, hey, that's amazing.
Yeah.
You know? Maya, you won your first jury trial.
And I remember
a
it
sex
was very
assault.
nice. I mean, you did actually message me afterwards, and you know, and told me congratulations. And you're very supportive. For people who don't know you well enough, Ryan, you're very nice.
Thank you.
And you're very supportive. And it's very nice to have someone like you in the bar, really.
Well, thank you. But I was, you know, it is because, to me, it's the signature achievement of a defense lawyer. And you did it in I don't know if that was your first or...
Yeah, that was...
Yeah, your first. So like that is, you know, I think that is very cool, an extraordinary achievement. Like I say, like to me, that is the apex achievement of a defense lawyer. I wouldn't trade it for anything. So yeah, I mean, don't you want another hit of that?
True. True.
Yeah.
Well, so it was very nice, Ryan, to chat with you today. And honestly, I really hope that this episode in particular will help any defense lawyer who's watching this, who's having struggling with the practice, not sure if they want to continue. They should really watch this. I encourage everyone to watch this episode because it really, you're reminding us about how fun and cool this job is. It is fun.
Fun
right?
and cool.
Yeah, it is.
And if you can, here's something, if you are a young lawyer that I find really interesting. If you can just adopt the Rocky Balboa mentality, just survive and keep moving forward, then all of a sudden, 15 years later, you're like one of the only, there's not too many lawyers who routinely run serious cases in front of juries. Like if you start talking to lawyers, there's all sorts of different kinds of practices. And like I say, like you can have an appellate law practice. There's also a tremendous amount of variation. But what you'll find is that not that many people are doing it routinely and doing it well 15 years later. You'll be one of the only ones. And then, like the sky's the limit. Why should you have a salary with a ceiling when you can, you don't have to.
Yeah.
You can do better if you can just survive. It's hard, but learn how to survive the lows and enjoy the highs, not get too high, not get too low. And then you'll be one of the only people who has this really unique skill set. I'm very grateful for it.
Well, thank you. This was really a very fun episode. It was very nice to chat with you. It's always nice to chat with you, Ryan. And I really hope that this will give hope to a lot of people who are struggling. I know a lot of our colleagues are struggling right now in the practice of criminal defense. So I really hope that this is good timing and that this will help people reconsider before they sign a contract with the Crown's office, because I'm sure a lot of people are signing contracts right now.
Yeah, think twice before you sign that contract and have to read a book of policies this thick. So, yeah, it was a pleasure, Maya. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.